I want to welcome you to the show, Benjamin.
Yay, thank you so much.
And I'm so glad that I could finally get you to come on the Healing Connection, because I know you and I have been speaking about this for quite a while now, and I'm really happy that you could come on and share the work that you do.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Benjamin, so you've been doing craniosacral therapy work in Eugene since 1990 and some type of body work since 1982. If you could talk a little bit about the history and the background of craniosacral therapy, what it is, just to give it some education to the viewing audience that may not know about it.
Certainly. Craniosacral therapy comes from cranial osteopathy. Cranial osteopathy was developed in the 20s by a gentleman named William Sutherland. Craniosacral therapy, the term was first coined by a gentleman named John Upledger. Upledger was in charge of a team of experts doing research at Michigan State University in the 70s, early 70s. And basically John and his team of researchers were assigned to either support or refute Sutherland's, some of the work of Sutherland's, predominantly looking at the orthodox medicine as it's practiced in the United States, debating whether the cranial bones are able to move in adulthood or not. And Upledger pretty decidedly, with modern scientific method, was able to prove that all of the sutures, the joints of the skull, do have all the tissues of any other joint in the body. They have nervous tissue, they have vascular tissue, and collagen, elastin, etc. The list goes on. I can talk more about that later, but that's a little bit of a nutshell of the origin. Craniosacral therapy, as taught by Upledger and then some of my other teachers, and how I practice it, is coming from a non-medical term, non-medical approach. The medical disclaimer: we're not practicing medicine. We're basically, the craniosacral therapy is an approach that works with the body and not on the body. A cranial osteopath is going to go through the diagnosis and treatment process, whereas the protocols that were developed by Upledger are really designed to be able to work with the body without having to diagnose and quote-unquote treat any particular dysfunction in the body. That's a little bit of a thumbnail sketch of craniosacral therapy as opposed to cranial osteopathy. There are several other modalities. The chiropractic modality of sacro-occipital technique has a lot of the same understanding of the work. When we talk about craniosacral therapy, it sounds like we're talking about bones, the cranial bones and the sacral bones, when in reality most people have heard of meninges or meningitis. Right. The meninges are the craniosacral system. Okay.
How so?
The craniosacral system is well, you would say a recently discovered physiological system that we don't teach about in our anatomy physiology books. It's a relatively tough, non-elastic sheath around the brain and spine. You could look at it as a semi-closed hydraulic system that expands and recedes with the production and reassimilation of cerebrospinal fluid within the boundaries of the meninges, or the outside layer is called the dura mater. The dura mater is attached firmly to all the cranial bones, several of the cervical bones, and then just makes up the nerve cuffs, but is not connected to the bones of the rest of the spine until you get down to the low back and the sacrum, which is that wedge-shaped bone between your hips. That's why we call it craniosacral, not because we're making adjustments to the cranial bones or to the sacrum, but because we're helping free up any restriction, any abnormal tension within the structures that immediately surround the brain and spine.
Well, one thing you said earlier is that you're not working on the body, you're working with the body.
Correct.
So it sounds like you're facilitating the body's own healing.
Right. Yeah, the approach is definitely, I sometimes liken palpating or feeling the craniorhythmic pulse to watching the ripples on a still pond. Okay, if you were to look at a model of what's called fascial continuity. The fascia is the connective tissue of the body,
Right.
and it is as continuous as you are, if it literally wrapped in and around everything. If you look at that as the fabric of the body and the cranial rhythm, the movement of this production of fluid in the brain, traveling through the soft tissue of the body, then wherever there's a restriction in the soft tissue of the body, that will change that movement, or expose a restricted movement, or an asymmetrical, or a disharmonious. So we want not just movement in all the structures of the body, but we want harmonious and synchronous movement in all the structures of the body. Otherwise, we have some level of disease process showing up. The work itself comes to the work. I would tell a 3-year-old as I have my ears in my hands. And we're not coming from a place of thinking we're going to fix anything. We're coming from a place of listening to the body, getting behind the body's efforts to self-correct. And basically, that's what it is. Just you repeat the process, right? One of the interesting pieces of the work that allows us to work on, I think so miraculously as it is that we really are supporting the body's own ability to self-correct. And when we scrape our knee, we don't have to tell the body how to do that. And there really is no other disease process in my mind that the body doesn't know how to work with.
So if you could, tell us about how you got involved in craniosacral therapy, and in the introduction I mentioned Traeger bodywork, and that you identify yourself as a kinesthetic empath. If you could say something about your own personal story with it and what that terminology means.
I think it's interesting to look at all of our processes, or many of the processes in our life, as gifts. So you asked me about back to the origins of the work and what got me into the work. When I was 19, I was taking my very first massage class at the local Y in Minneapolis, and it was just one night a week for 6 weeks. And it's interesting, it was all about intentional touch. All about intentional touch. That's the very first day, the teacher, if you're not clear about intention, there's the door, and you need to really revisit that every time you touch someone. And I think I'm real fortunate in that everybody that I would look at or call any of my main teachers were very clear about that. About the middle of the summer, I had a dream. It was a lucid dream, and it happened for 2 nights in a row. The first night I did your typical 19-year-old gig and rolled over, went back and went to sleep. And the second night, it came back like a pounding in my head. And when I was lucid enough in the dream to see the spelling of the word, I saw also my brother's dictionary. So get your ass out of bed and go look this word up. And the word is iatrogenic. Iatrogenic, as defined in the dictionary, is doctor and/or hospital-caused disease and death. And that was a new concept for me. A new concept for me. And we talk about lucid dreams and guidance, and I believe that we are truly divinely guided in this life. Whether we see it, whether we witness it or not, whether it's graceful, whether it's painful, is a whole nother, it's probably both all the time, depending on the individual's experience. However, I never took that dream as a pointing fingers at our current medical establishment or anyone in particular. I took it as a calling, and in turn the feeling in that lucid dream was a calling for me to be able to develop the skills not to impose anything upon the individual. And there we come full circle back to the intention, come full circle back to being able to work, as you say, holistically work with the intent of being able to support the body in its own ability to self-correct, ultimately working from a loving place. When it is that you first asked me how I got into the work, my thought afterwards was, well, I got into it probably with my own head injury at the age of 6.
So you had a head injury?
I had a fractured skull at the age of 6, and I functioned through school
but wasn't diagnosed dyslexic until I was 21. And it was all largely the craniosacral therapy and some vision therapy that is not a problem. I have dyslexia no more. It used to be that just looking at the book, it was so traumatic for me that I would go into almost fight or flight. You know, I don't know how many other people have that experience, but it was very stressful even, and I'd plug away. You know, I had good retention, but it would take me 2 or 3 times as long to read most anything as my siblings. So there's a piece of that in getting into the work, in that I think having the dyslexia allowed me in this culture to stay a little bit right brain dominant. I didn't get shoved off into as much of a rational left brain approach, so that when it was that I got into being a therapist, a massage therapist in Minnesota, there were different modalities that just naturally came very easily. I was a massage therapist in '84. There's a woman named Marilyn Krieger who came to the Minnesota Therapeutic Massage Network meeting. She was presenting Traeger. I really liked it. I really liked what she had to say. I liked the approach.
What is Traeger bodywork? If you could just
Traeger,
briefly describe it.
Right. Traeger, it was a form of bodywork developed by a gentleman named Dr. Milton Traeger. And Traeger itself, the intent is to listen to the body. It uses a lot of gentle rocking, some gentle shaking and compressions, where the intent of the practitioner is to ask the body what's even easier, what's even nicer. So essentially you could look at it as a body neuromuscular re-education, where the body's remembering how it is that it can move, not functioning from habitual restricted patterns of movement. It was actually at a Traeger training that I first received craniosacral therapy. We were at a Traeger training in the fall of '84, and Marilyn said, "Don't leave the building during lunch." And I left the building during lunch. I was starting a new job the next day. Thought I can do this, or zip out and get my uniform handled and everything. So I came back about an hour and a half. I went out at lunch, and my dump truck ran a red light and totaled my Toyota. And I came dazed and stumbling back in shock, back into the training an hour and a half late, and Marilyn took me over to the corner, and she didn't do Traeger, she did craniosacral. And it really was the craniosacral, I feel, that helped me heal from, my nervous system heal from that insult, as well as, you know, a lifetime of wear and tear and the original fracture, etc.
It's a strong